virtual warmth and wisdom at your fingertips. You are watching Fireside Chat.
Evolve Beyond Borders is proud to introduce Bart Vanderstorm and Raymond Oemar from Payroll Minds. Bart Vanderstorm is the founder and managing partner. With an experience of over 25 years, he has led the HR and payroll transformation journey for leading global companies. Raymond Oemar is the founder and operations partner. He leverages over 2 decades of industry experience to simplify global payroll and help HR and payroll professionals. Let's welcome Bart and Raymond as they share their insights on processing payroll globally, a European perspective.
Welcome participants to this Niamo event being hosted by Niamo and allowing us to as Payroll Minds, share our thoughts and elaborate on the perspective what we have in the payroll industry. Short introduction of myself. I'm Raymond Oemar, COO in Payroll Minds, managing the operations and managing the consultants across the globe, working for us with various clients. And I have Bart with me.
Yeah, welcome everybody. Thank you so much, Niamo, for this opportunity. And yeah, looking forward to this conversation about the global payroll process and what it takes from a European perspective. As Raymond introduced, my name is Bart Vanderstorm, and I head up the Payroll Minds organization as a Chief Executive Officer.
Great, thanks Bart. With this introduction, we wanted to start a conversation and elaborate on indeed the topic of today, processing payroll globally and giving a European perspective on it. One of the key things what we see in the payroll industry where multi-corporate nationals and global companies are facing is what is the way forward in payroll? Is it a local by local model, or do we need to, from a decentralized model, go to a global international model or centralized? In that regards, I would want to ask you, Bart, in terms of these kind of aspects in the industry, what are your thoughts in terms of these two models, and how do you see that fit in the global industry today?
Yeah, great question, Raymond. And I think I'd like to start with the question of what's the difference between local and global. I guess the local payroll process specifically is tailored around local people, local operations, local HR organizations. And most of these HR and payroll folks, they know everything about the entire country's rules, regulations, and they know close to almost everybody by name, simply because they're local. And clearly, there's a lot to say to this. There's a lot of good things about this. But on the flip side, if you're a global organization and you want to have control and you want to have a stable and concise payroll process across the universe, it's not necessarily sustainable from a process perspective. And so, a couple of questions I think the global organizations always need to ask themselves is like, first of all, locations, meaning where do you put your global payroll staff? Second thing is, which tools do you use, and are those tools locally compliant? And can they fulfill the duties and the needs that you need locally? And then ultimately the process itself. And typically when I have conversations with organizations that are looking for an answer to this question, it's like, how do you design your process in respect of compliance? So typically the reason, if you have a local team, your compliance is naturally taken care of, simply because the people that are sitting locally in the country, let's take France for an example, they are already in France, they speak the language, and they can fulfill most of the duties that are required locally to be done. Now, whether they have all the knowledge and whether there's a sufficient retention of those skills, etc., is a completely different discussion, but yet they're locally present. Now, when you look at this from a global perspective, the question it automatically begs is, how do you deal with this local compliance element? And I like to call this the tier 3 of the process, which is how do you ensure that wherever you are, in which country you are, and let's assume you have a central location where you host your HR and payroll staff, especially the operationals and the administrative tasks. The question is, how do you ensure that you can still fulfill the needs locally? So when outsourcing and when looking at global or international payroll, the question is not just about systems, which is typically what organizations look for, or processes, which is what they're also looking for from an effort perspective. But the main question is how you're going to deal with it from a compliance perspective. And I think you can categorize the countries in a couple of sections. And there's obviously the easier countries where you can do everything from outside of the country that you're running for. But then there's also this group of countries, and France is one of those, Italy, Germany. There's a couple of those countries in where you have to be locally present, or you need to have a local partner who can help you fulfill the compliance elements of the end process, which is filing tax returns, paying taxes and Social Security, and fulfilling all the needs related to the legislative labor law perspective, because that's the number one thing that typically is being forgotten, is like, how do you deal with the labor compliance side of things? I don't know, Raymond, if you have anything to share in that respect.
I can only emphasize that is indeed the key things here. How to fit in the localized compliance and requirements and rules into a fitting model that globally can service your organization and make sure that you can indeed meet up to all the specifics on each of the areas. And to maybe look at that perspective in terms of these categorizations of specific countries, one of the other questions would be that how would you be able to accommodate your resources in such a way that you can indeed service your employees in a global model versus a local model?
Yeah.
How would you see that, Bart?
Yeah, I think from an organization perspective, going global, the downside, as discussed, is not having the connection with your local workforce anymore. But the upside is that you can start thinking about, first of all, retention of your payroll staff, because you make everybody's career a little bit more interesting, simply because you can build a bit of a larger team in a central location versus having all these single contributors in local countries. Second of all, you can also start sourcing a little bit better towards skill set, because let's say you're running European payroll, you got 15 countries in Europe, you have 20,000 employees, and you may need, let's say, 12 payroll professionals. You can then start thinking about what kind of skill sets do I really need. When they are all local, you need people who know everything. They know they can run a payroll, they can know the systems, they know the rules, they can handle employee queries, they can handle the leadership questions, they can do it all. Whereas if you're centrally, you can start thinking about, hey, but hold on, I only need a handful of administrators, people who understand the tier one low touch, high volume data processing, versus the ones who are dealing with compliance or dealing with the more specific procedures. You don't need all these specialists. You just need a couple of generalists, a couple of specialists, and then maybe a good model with a third party who can help you with all the compliance elements of it. So from a efficiency perspective and from a employee retention perspective, going central has quite some benefits. Now, again, another negative of it is, how do you deal with the local leaderships of each country? How do you make sure that you fulfill all the needs from a workers' council perspective and all these local specificities that require local language skills, that require local understanding of the procedures. So yeah, in that respect, there's pros and cons to each angle. But from a process and from a systems perspective, it's easier when you're central. From a compliance perspective, it's easier when you are local.
Great thoughts, Bart, and I think that all makes sense. If you look at this from a experience perspective, could you maybe share your experience of a successful transformation from local versus local to global, being centralized, and maybe touch on certain points that large companies need to consider in the way forward to consider that?
Yeah, I think, the biggest success, Raymond, you and I were on this together, and I won't name the name, but, a large technology organization in the world Our assignment was to initially start with Europe and then eventually also do APAC and LATAM. But the assignment was take all the HR and payroll local resources and processes and centralize them into one single location, which was in Poland. And so part of the role was to manage the entire change control process, to manage the local leadership and the local employees to understand why this was happening to begin with. Then we obviously had a little bit of a limited restructure going on with the local HR payroll teams that were not going to move to the central location in Poland. And then the third thing was to design a process and to implement tools that would facilitate the global payroll process. And in there, the most important element of it all was to cross-train and to train the new people whilst keeping the people that ultimately had to leave, keeping them energized and positive towards the actual change. Eventually, we managed. It took a sizable period, but eventually we managed to move from I believe it was the headcount HR payroll process across Europe into a 12 employee headcount divided over different skill sets, with one single tool from an HR perspective and one single tool from a payroll perspective. So quite an achievement. But I think the main focus, and this is the number one advice that I'd like to give to those people that are listening and are going through the same change, is like, don't focus on the actual payroll vendor as of yet. Focus on the organizational design, focus on the change, and then find yourself a partner that has the capabilities to fulfill your requirements, to make sure that you get the partner that supports you to the means necessary.
Thank you, Bart. I think that really was indeed, looking back at the experience, a very successful, and the process is still running smoothly at that customer. So indeed can label that as a success. If you consider this to indeed other companies and large corporates at this point in time that would want to indeed make that move, what kind of consideration would you give them in terms of the approach and the strategy to go about and then make sure that these kind of things are indeed successful? That, to your point, it was a sizable period of time. So maybe share some considerations that these corporates would have to take into account.
Yeah, and a lot of them are obviously cliche and comes without saying, but to name it, again, as I said in the previous comment I've made, don't focus this around changing a payroll vendor, changing it to a thing that it will all be kumbaya. I don't think that that's the right approach. You need to really look at this from a end-to-end cross-functional perspective, because it will change everything. It will change the way employees interact when they onboard. It will change the way people interact if they need questions or they have questions and they need answers. It will interact the way you deal with IT from a systems perspective, all the way down to it will impact the way you deal with finance. Assuming those finance organization will be co-located in the shared services organization, then that's all be fine. But typically global companies have a local compliance team as well related to accounting. So how you interact with everybody is more important. So start with really identifying what's the as-is process look like. Who are all these people? What are they really doing? And this is part of the as-is. The amount of time that we encounter a client that did not realize that there's a lot more going on locally than they anticipated. And so as soon as they start ring fencing those teams that have to be relocated or actually are being made redundant locally and then have to move to central, the amount of companies that ultimately realized that there was like an additional 10-15% of work that was happening locally that they weren't aware of is significant. So as is, then design your to-be. Really think about this, what do we want the process to look like? And most important question in that element is the roles and responsibilities, specifically the ones between HR, the payroll organization, and the finance organization. And, really sit down with your HR and finance folks and cross-functional partners and have that tough discussion about, why is HR doing something? Why does payroll doing something? And why is finance doing something? And, take the courage and have the courage to really relook at the process and take away certain responsibilities where they don't belong and design them to be where they belong, even if it means you have to reallocate resources or move resources amongst the teams. So and then obviously make sure you get yourself the right system, the right partnership. You can have a very solid and strong tool at your fingertips, but if the partnership with your local vendor, with the global vendor is not to the level you need it to be, you're going to struggle. It's a matter of fact. So those would be my top of minds, Raymond.
Thank you for sharing, Bart. I think that, again, makes perfect sense and fits into what we have seen across the year, various assignments that we have gone through together, indeed. Maybe to allude a little bit more further on other topics. If you look at the consideration companies need to make to either make a switch to local, central or decentral, what is the key thing also maybe to consider is the internal organization, and how is the process designed as of today? Is it scattered around various tools? Are there manual processes or procedures? Do you think it is wise for a company to already start negotiating and looking at the strategy to change, or do you think that they still need to do some homework themselves before and to be prepped in such a way to be successful?
Yeah, I think asking the question is giving the answer in this case. I think, as I said before, the once you've nailed down your process, and once you know the roles and responsibilities and how you want it to look like, the actual implementation of a tool and facilitation of the move into the different processes is a downstream, follow the plan type of approach. The difficulty is making those decisions about where to put the processes and where to put the responsibilities. That's the number one issue. And for this, you also, as we started the conversation with, the global payroll professional is a completely different skill set than the local typical payroll professional. Of course, completely is maybe a bit exaggerated, but the local payroll professionals are typically people that are very detail oriented, maybe not necessarily the best in communications, maybe struggling a little bit with the local leadership, maybe not having an eyesight on the entire end-to-end process, and not necessarily feeling the ownership of it all. Versus the global payroll expert, they are more process managers, vendor managers, escalation managers, project managers. They have to ensure that even during implementation, but also after implementation at the ongoing payroll process, they have to make sure that all the stakeholders are being fed with information, with escalations, with things you need from them. So having a clear set of governance going on, making sure you have a regular meeting cadence going on, making sure you document the things the way they should, being factual and making sure that you have clear documentation of how you've agreed things to happen is key. Not necessarily to have this one neck to choke, although eventually that's what it is about. But it is also about making sure that you can really narrow down the issues to the point that everybody knows exactly where they occur and how they need to be resolved. I think, face it, there's no such real such thing as a global HR system that can do everything globally and locally. There's no such thing as a global HR or global payroll tool that can do everything. So it's going to be a mix and match, a mix and match of patches, in where tools are being used with the existence of people in between, where there's handoffs, and within all these patches and within all these interfaces and within all these handoffs between people, there's risk of failure. And so identifying those, fixing those, and doing it in a way that you have strong governance, good conversations with your cross-functional partners and leadership to fix those issues is going to be key.
Understood. And I think that, again, to the point that you're making, it does make sense to look at the overall scalability of whatever is going on and necessary. I think with this, we're heading towards a certain perspective of timing as well, but would love to continue the conversation and invite the participants to, if they are going on with these kind of aspects in their organization, to feel free to reach out to us and have an open conversation with us on these kind of topics, because we are obviously all in the same industry and would love to counter these kind of discussion with our peers and invite them to reach out and then have that conversation as well.
Yeah, just to summarize everything we just said, I think when payroll minds get involved, and typically we like to be involved before the global organizations or international organizations ask themselves what to do, is really asking yourself all the questions you need to ask yourself. And we can help facilitate this. We can obviously support organizations to do this. And as we do this, we always find the right model for the organization. So I will tell you that the amount of times that I advise an organization to go into a central process is down to maybe less than 50%. Not every organization is capable of managing a central process. They might be able to do certain things centrally, but the more you deviate from central versus decentral, the more handoff you'll have. But if you are an organization in a very complex industry, or if you're an organization with very complex local rules, which is typical also to specific industries, or whatever you are an organization in a large or in a huge growth spurt, or you're in a scaling spurt, or you just started up, I think many of those activities dictate whether you should or should not look at these things globally or centrally, and not just necessarily from an organizational perspective, but also from a systems and from a global vendor perspective. With every level of centralization, with every level of interface or automation, with every level of central systems, the downside of it is that you lose a little bit of flexibility, which today is being taken care of by people. But don't underestimate this, meaning the people make it happen. Remove the people, assume everything can be done by systems and automation, and you'll find out pretty soon enough that you're stuck and you have a horrendous process that doesn't give you any flexibility, etc. at all. And of course, to me and to my team and my fellow consultants, payroll and HR is the most important process of an organization. But we all know that we're mission critical and we need to facilitate the growth of an organization. And so staying agile and staying flexible within the boundaries of also ensuring your compliance and you pay the people accurately is the key to the success of any particular organization. So with that, I think enough food for thought, and hopefully during the session with the Neamo here in our Baxter building, hosted by us, we can have these conversations one-on-one, and happy to answer all your questions or to hear about your journeys and see how we can go from there. Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you all.
Thank you, guys.